Hello. I have a lot that I want to film today and maybe a little tomorrow. So I decided, screw it, I'm just gonna film everything all kind of at the same time. And I'm not going to really waste a second this weekend. I hope not, at least I've already wasted several hours just sleeping. So that's how I feel about that. But I decided I was going to do like a May reading wrap up plus like I don't know, get ready with me. I don't know. I don't know. I don't think people are gonna care, but that's fine. It's not that I care if people care. It's more like I don't want people to be like, oh, how annoying. You know, that's what I don't want. Ooh, also I can do a little Muji haul. Just bought some stuff for Muji. First up, I can show you. Look at this. It's a squeegee for cleaning my windows. That's so exciting. I also got one of these, which I'm thinking I can both use with another thing you'll see here, but also like I can put like a rag and instead of having the Swiffers, I can just use like a rag that I can then just throw in the washing machine. I also got this, which is a dry mop, and it is already covered in dog hair. I did test it out a little bit. It does work. It does collect dog hair. Then this was the pièce de la résistance. It is a telescoping handle thing, which I think is amazing. Like just be able to have things that go compact, and it's like an empty attachment, so I can attach it to several one of those things. And like if I ever move and want to get a broom, I can just get the broom attachment. We already have a broom, but still. And I also got hangers. I prefer wooden hangers, even though I know they're heavier, because I think that like the other hangers just break, and I would rather like hangers something you will literally always need, like I will always need to have more hangers. So I think it just makes sense to get nicer quality ones. I have never had a situation where I was like, oh no, too many hangers. But I have been in the opposite where I'm like, I need more hangers right now. So that's the situation with that. Okay, but let's get into what this video is actually about, and it is my May reading wrap up, which will be pretty easy because I only read 3 books in May. The first book that I read, I believe I've touched on this in a previous video, so some of these opinions are not going to be my first go around saying them. But the first book I read was Hate in the Homeland by Cynthia Idriss-Miller, or Cynthia Miller Idriss maybe. And this is a nonfiction, I read it on audiobook, a nonfiction read about growing far-right, neo-Nazi, white supremacist movements. It touches around the world, but, I think primarily focusing on places like primarily, obviously, like because a lot of it is white supremacist, it's like focusing on like white countries, but they talk about Ukraine, they talk about Germany. I don't remember them mentioning the UK a ton. I'm sure they mentioned it a little bit, but then also the US was of course mentioned. And I don't know, I think this is if you know nothing about white supremacy in America, if you are really out of touch with those areas and you're, like if you're an NPR listener, that's how I describe this book. Like if you're an NPR listener and you don't know how social media is used in fueling some of these movements, I think this book could be interesting. It touches a lot on not only like the internet culture, but also like MMA and how fashion is used by, white supremacists, or how food and cuisine is used. But I think it was quite academic, and I think it missed some of that narrative building that can be really helpful when you're looking at like, I want to understand better how people wind up in these situations. Like what do they think this is fulfilling in their life that I don't know. Like what do these people, these youths, feel like they're missing that they can gain through these movements? I don't think there was enough of that kind of narrative, and I think that it was so academic that it missed out on the opportunity to, I think, really captivate and explain. And I don't know, I realize that I'm saying might sound that I am like having some sympathy for these people, and I don't. It's more like, how do I find that element of humanity? Like, what are the fears that these movements are solving for these people? And in that way, I think once you understand like those really basic level fears, how can you move on and be like, okay, that's what you're afraid of, but like, I'm going to explain it from this perspective. I just thought it was, I don't think it went far enough in that particular way. I also feel like yeah, it was quite dry, I would say, quite dry, quite academic. Um, and also, as someone who is on the internet, I feel like a lot of this stuff I actually already knew. Like, I watch H Bomber Guy, I watch ContraPoints, I know who the golden one is, and so in that way, I think for people who aren't as familiar, it might be more informative. But for me, like, I know the whole like soy boy conversation, but I also have seen like a lot of, I've seen them being made fun of, but like vegan neo-Nazis, like I've seen those people too. Um, I also, the more interesting part to me was like the whole MMA conversation. But I also think that didn't completely surprise me because I know about like Andrew Tate and his connection to those spaces. So again, it was one of those things, like I'm not trying to say that like, oh, I already knew everything in this book. Like that's not the case at all. But I think that this stuff was in that way, like the communities that were being targeted, I don't think were really surprising to me. Like, yeah, I don't think that I was um maybe like the correct audience for this book, just because I do think that there's people out there, like I said, sort of NPR people who are like, what's going on in America? I don't understand the youths. And perhaps this book would be more suited for them. Yeah, I think, yeah, I think that this was a book club pick. I've mentioned in the past my book club that I'm a part of, and this is one of those picks. And one of the conversations we started having was like this crunchy to alt-right pipeline. And I think this book does kind of touch a lot on that. Is this, like if you're afraid of like chemicals and you're afraid of, all of that stuff, how, movements like this can start giving you like, oh, this is why you should be afraid of that stuff. This is who you should actually be afraid of, and all that weird conspiracy stuff. Like at some point you're so far in one way that like it doesn't kind of matter what your beliefs are. You're an extremist conspiracy theorist. Yeah, so the books after that I actually have these. I read these like physical copies. I read Diary of a Void by Emi Yagi, and I first saw Willow from books about books. I always get them mixed up. Saw her talk about this book, and I was like, oh, what like an interesting premise. Very to me like quite a comfort read. Touches on like feminist issues, modern life, sort of a quiet like a quiet reflection. It also gave me in Diving Pools by Yoko Gawa, I think is her name. She has a thing about like her sister's pregnancy. There's like a character who is tracking her sister's pregnancy, and this is about you've learned this very early on. A woman, she's an office worker. She says like, oh, I can't take out the coffee today. A menial task is always assigned to her, even though they're more junior people. So I can't take out the coffee today because I'm pregnant and this smell makes me nauseated. And basically we follow her life and that lie, and like we see where it goes for her. And I think the premise is quite interesting. I also appreciated, I think, this the sense of normalcy that we saw presented, like, oh, like the things that I'm able to do now are like go to the grocery store when other people are at the grocery store. And that like idea just of being normal, and how like her humanity, her ability to have a normal life is almost allowed to her in that she's now pregnant. And yeah, I thought it was a really, like, again, like kind of one of those like calming reads where I was like, I'm interested to see how this is going to resolve this. There's obviously with pregnancy, there is sort of a conclusion that happens. So it's fascinating to see that. I was fascinating to see the arenas in which these discussions were happening, because it's like, is it going to stay just within this office worker? Is it going to be this really private and internal conversation? Like, what's going to happen? And yeah, I thought it was handled really well. It's not like necessarily a spectacular book, but like I said, quite an easy read. What it really made me think about, there are two sort of main ones. Oh, and also I should have mentioned it's translated by David Boyd and Lucy North. I know David Boyd is like a big like Japanese to English translator. I've definitely heard his name sort of thrown around before. Really, what this book made me think about was this podcast that I listened to like a week ago, and in the podcast, the woman, she had gone through menopause at age 25, and it's really good. I'll like put a link for it. You should check it out totally. But she talks about going through menopause at age 25 and finding out information like, oh, you're missing like entire left ovary, and we don't know how this happened. We don't know why you're going through menopause. It's I forget the term, like peri something. It's like there's just no way for us to really know. Like most people, we will never know why they go through early menopause. And the reactions that people had to her was very much like about her fertility and about like her family planning and her husband and her like a child that she will never be able to have in a certain way, you know, not that she can't have children in other ways, like you will never be able to have it in a certain way. And she sort of had this idea of like, this was my body, right? This happened to me. This was like an internal process I was having to deal with. Like the assumptions I had about my body, the relationship I had with my body was totally changed. But all of a sudden, the only thing people care about is this being who doesn't even exist, like someone who's not even out there. Like their thoughts are towards that rather than me and and I was like, wow, that's such a good point. I hadn't even thought about that, because you know, I would love to be a mother at some point, and I know that would be devastating if, you know, if that happens to me, it'd be devastating in that end. But like even just then, like my own relationship with my body now becoming about someone who isn't even existing, like that's crazy. And so when I kind of sit the other way around. I watched the podcast after I read the book, and it really reminded me of the book, and like even this idea of like diary of a void, and kind of like the like this woman and like not seeking fulfillment, but like being able to be seen as like a whole person, you know, but actually there's like nothing there. I don't know. That's kind of very slightly long-winded. So, and the last book I read was The Gardener from Ochakov by Andrey Kurkov, and the translator is Amanda Love Draha. And okay, so I was really excited to finish this because I bought it like a year ago when I was in Amsterdam. So I was like, yes, finally I finished this. It feels really nice to like go back into like the list that I write and like check off that book that I got a while ago. And I picked this up because it has sort of similar themes to, not similar themes, but it was like kind of like Time Shelter by Georgi Gospodinov, which won the International Booker Prize. And so I sort of thought like, oh, this would be kind of a fun thing to read. It also sort of deals with memory and time in an interesting way. And it's basically like a time travel book, this one. And so yeah, I was like, that'll be kind of interesting to compare and contrast. This book, though, I will say, I think is slightly, I don't know, like, you know when the back of the book tells you, like, oh, this is a book about blank, or they'll say something, it's like, this book is like this, and then you read it and you're like, it's not really about that. Like, they did the same thing with Kim Ji-young, born 1982. Like, the back description, totally wrong. For example, it says this, like this line is, after a perplexing conversation with a terrified man, a wine smuggler, Yagi comes to an unbelievable conclusion. He has found his way back to 1957 Kyiv, and it isn't the innocent era his mother has so sentimentally described. I feel like that part made me believe like, oh, this is going to be a comparison to the memories of his mother and then the realities that he will see when he's there. And that I thought would be like a really important part of this book is this element of, you know, I thought this was going to be one way, but actually I'm seeing, you know, maybe how like Kurkov has been oppressed or something along those lines. And it really wasn't about that at all. But it was kind of like a cool, a fun story. You know, a guy he discovers something cool. He finds like relationships with certain people. He has friends he has to help out. He meets people along the way. There's like cool, interesting cast of characters. Um, you know, a slight conversation about like unemployment and things like that, and making money and all these other things. Um, yeah, like a fun story, absolutely. And I think to me, there's something about like Eastern European literature, which often I think features this sort of cast of characters, and you have a main character who does not necessarily like do anything spectacular on their own, but they're able to meet the right people who help them through the story and through the situation. And I feel like this book was very emblematic of that trope. I don't know if that's a trope. I don't know what do you call that? Theme. Um, and so yeah, it was like not, I don't want to say boring, but it was like if you were expecting this like conversation about like the differences between someone's memory and realities on the ground, and then you get that, you're like, oh, it's like really different. And I really had to like take time to kind of recalibrate my brain, but I still enjoyed it. I thought similar to Diary of a Void, it was like, this is just like a nice pleasant read. Like I'm not necessarily like blown out of my water, this is the most amazing thing, but it was like relaxing enough. And sometimes, you know, you don't have to read like groundbreaking literature every single time you pick up a book, and that was those two books, I think. Yeah, so that's all I read for May. So yeah, I've been those are the books that I read. I did like touch other books, but I wouldn't necessarily, obviously didn't finish them. One of them is like the books of Jacob, which I have over there. I also got Ninth Building. I can't remember the name of the author. And I like touched a few of the short stories there. The main one that I honestly, if I'd worked harder, I could have definitely finished in May was Foxtails by Tomihiko Norimi. And yeah, this is also like, again, very comfort, creepy literature, my favorite kind. And yeah, it's been a pretty good ride, that book, that little guy. But yeah, this is both the end of my video talking about the books that I read in May and the end of my makeup routine. So yeah, sorry about the whole makeup thing. Again, I'm trying to get a lot of stuff done today. But I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know if you've read any of these books. Like the video if you liked the video. Comment if you have any comments. And I will see you in my next video. Bye-bye.